Hi, and welcome to April's Cheese Club. I'm Jazz, the Quality and Operations Manager here at Paxton & Whitfield, and this month we've got 4 cheeses for you to enjoy during the month of April. We've got 2 cheeses from the continent and 2 cheeses from the UK. One of those being a brand new seasonal cheese which launched at the end of 2024, but you're getting the first of the season for this year's Cheese Club, and I hope you enjoy. This is Pecorino Pugliese. This is quite an unusual take on an Italian pecorino. So an Italian pecorino is a hard used milk cheese. And this is quite a different take on that. So it's made in the region of Puglia, which is kind of not a region typically known for the production of pecorino. It's also got a few kind of other differences around it, which make it quite an exciting and quite a unique version of this cheese. So this pecorino is made exclusively with the milk of the Apulian sheep, and this comes from the cheesemaker's own flock. So really nice kind of, the cheesemakers have the ewes, have the animals, they milk them, and then they make this cheese. It's also handcrafted and kind of matured using traditional techniques. So if we looked at the rind of this cheese, you'll see it's got these interesting kind of markings. It's got this kind of peachy, kind of beige coloured rind. You can actually see it behind me quite clearly. So it's kind of quite mottled. And then it's got these lines kind of going down it. And this is because the cheese is matured in a basket. And that basket then imprints kind of on the outside of the rind of the cheese. So it's a really kind of nice traditional technique that they're using to make this specific kind of pecorino. It's also aged in a cave, which again is quite unusual for a pecorino. And the temperature and the humidity of this cave, they really produce quite a unique aroma to the final cheese. So if you smell the cheese, you'll notice it's quite fruity. And yeah, quite fruity in the nose and a little bit of kind of like earthiness. And that's because of this way it's matured. Now, enough talking about the cheese, let's have a taste. So it's got that kind of hard texture you'd expect from a pecorino. You can see it's slightly firmer and grainier towards the rind, which is quite typical. Cheeses mature from the outside in, and then a little bit more give in the center. So let's have a taste. So the first thing I'm getting, it's got nice kind of, that nice salty hit I'd expect from a pecorino, but then it's actually quite different from something like a pecorino sardo. It's less dry, it's got more moisture in the bite, kind of like a toothsome kind of snap to it. And like super fruity, like loads of fruitiness up front. It's kind of got like an opal fruits kind of fruitiness to it, which is really pleasant and balances that saltiness really well. It's a really interesting take on a pecorino and something quite different to enjoy on your cheese board. This would pair beautifully with a nice Italian Prosecco as well. That fizz to cut through and the kind of white peach notes of a Prosecco to pair with the kind of light fruity notes of the cheese as well. And I hope you enjoy. This is Schnebelhorn. Schnebelhorn is an Alpine-style cheese made in Switzerland, and it's made with cow's milk. So this is actually a very exciting cheese for multiple reasons, but this is actually sold exclusively in the UK by Paxton & Whitfield. So one of the ways that we add value to this delicious cheese is in the way that it's matured. So we import this cheese from Switzerland at around a 4-month age profile. At this point, the cheese is quite young. It would kind of have like quite a bend to the texture of the cheese. And the flavors maybe haven't fully developed. It'll still be delicious, but it'll have a bit more sweetness and less of a kind of intense richness to it. We then age the cheese in our Cotswold maturing rooms. Actually, in the exact room I'm studying now, I'm stood next to a stillage of Schnebelhorns maturing. And we then age this for about 4 more months. So we're kind of looking to sell this cheese around 8 months. This is when the flavour's kind of at its fullest, at its best, and the cheese is tasting absolutely delicious. When we do this, we're turning the cheeses weekly to ensure even moisture distribution, brushing the cheeses and tasting them, looking after them, and making sure they're kept in a room which is at the right humidity and temperature to get the best out of that cheese. This cheese is made by the Guntensberger family in Switzerland, and they're primarily makers of a cheese called Appenzeller, which has a protection on it. This protection means that they can only produce a certain amount of that cheese. And then this means they have leftover milk. You can't ask your cows to stop milking, because you've made enough cheese, which means they need to do something with this surplus milk. And Schnebelhorn is one of those cheeses. So it's made with the milk from cattle that have grazed at high altitude pastures, and they also add cream to the milk. And this creates a really intense, rich, cheese with like a really nice fudgy, dense chew to it. Let's have a little taste. So this cheese is great melted, as typical with kind of mountain Swiss cheeses, but also really nice enjoyed on a cheese board. And the name Schnebelhorn actually means snow mountain. So behind the dairy, there is a big kind of hill or mountain, and that's what this cheese is named after. So Schnebelhorn, snow mountain. Let's have a taste. A really nice kind of fudgy, rich, like a dense chew to it. It's really characterful, really interesting. I'm getting savory, salty, buttery, nutty, and like a little gentle sweetness at the end. A really well-balanced cheese, a really Moorish cheese, and a really interesting cheese to pop on your cheese board, and I hope you enjoy. This is Colston Bassett Shropshire Blue. Colston Bassett are the dairy that make this cheese, and they're perhaps more famously known for making Stilton. So they're one of only 5 producers in the UK now who make Stilton, and they're known for using their traditional techniques of hand ladling, creating a really kind of rich and buttery Stilton. So the dairy was set up in 1913, and over the past 100 years, there's only been 4 head cheesemakers, which I think is quite incredible if you think about that kind of time span. And this kind of maintains tradition and quality. And today, the dairy is headed up by Billy Keevan. So originally, Shropshire Blue was made in Scotland. So in the 1970s, the cheese was developed, and it was developed by a guy who was training to make Stilton, who wanted to make something a little bit different. And it was originally known in the 70s as Inverness-shire Blue. The name then changed, and there are a couple of different stories about why the name changed. One story being that the name was chosen to help increase popularity, despite having no link to Shropshire. And another being that it linked back to a cheese that had been made in the 1920s in the county of Shropshire. So 2 slightly different stories about where the name comes from, but what we do know is that it was originated in Scotland in the 70s. Today, Shropshire Blue is typically made by Stilton makers, so Cropwell Bishop make a Shropshire Blue and Colston Bassett make a Shropshire Blue. And the cheese is very similar to a traditional Stilton, with one difference that it has this addition of annatto. So annatto is a Brazilian seed, and it's kind of like a natural food colouring. So it isn't going to add a flavour to the cheese, but it'll add this kind of colour and maybe affect the way it matures slightly, giving it maybe a creamier, richer breakdown than you would expect on a Stilton. And it provides this kind of really striking russet colour to the cheese. So cheeses such as Red Leicester, Appleby's Cheshire, they also use annatto in the colouring of their cheese. So it's a traditional cheese making technique to colour your cheese orange. The cheese, as I said, is made in a very similar way to Stilton. So the milk is inoculated with what we call Penicillium roqueforti, and that kind of then lies dormant until the cheese is pierced, usually twice during maturation. And this allows for that blue mold to develop and flourish within the cheese, leading to these kind of striking blue veins. You can see here the needles from where it's been pierced, the marks on the cheese. Let's have a taste. So even just with the knife, I can feel it's got a really rich texture, kind of like cutting through cold butter. The dense, it really is like the texture of cold butter. It's rich, it's buttery, salty, a really nice kind of level of acidity to it. And then the finish is kind of like a really nice kind of piquancy from that blue, a little bit of spice. A really delicious, kind of well-balanced, complex, but also quite a crowd pleaser of a blue cheese. And I hope you enjoy. This is Hidcote, and Hidcote is a brand new soft used milk cheese made by David Jower at Kingston Dairy in Gloucestershire. So this cheese is made about 20 minutes up the road from where I am in our Cotswold maturation rooms. And Dave is known for making a variety of cheeses. He does a cheese you may have heard of called Roll Right. He makes us an exclusive cheese called Corinia. And he makes kind of 5-6 cheeses in his little dairy in Gloucestershire. This is his newest venture and one of his first to use milk cheeses. So this cheese initially launched in kind of September in 2024. And we were fortunate enough to get one of the first batches, which was very exciting. And as soon as we all tried it, we were all very excited, so much so that we pre-ordered this Cheese Club batch in October. So over 6 months ago, we knew we wanted this cheese as soon as the season launched again. So you are the first people to be trying this cheese for this season, which again is very exciting. So as I said, it's a soft used milk cheese, and it's made seasonally. So this cheese is only made between March and September, and it's a lactic set cheese, which means it's quite fresh, quite young, and it has a geotrichum rind. So when I say that, if you look at this rind, it's all completely edible, and it's got this kind of like wiggly worm texture. That's geotrichum. So that's a rind you'll commonly see on kind of goats and sheep cheeses. The cheese is all hand ladled into these little boxes where it's matured, which is, I think it looks really nice on a cheese board. And it's kind of inspired by soft used milk cheeses from France. So we think of things like Pareil, and also kind of other similar cheeses in this style, like San Marcelin, San Felician, both of those made with cow's milk, but a similar kind of vibe and style that we're going for. So it's a fresh, young cheese, which will get kind of gooier and softer as it ages. This batch was only made last week. So when we placed the order for this cheese, Dave sent us a photo of all of the molds laid out, and that was about a week ago. And he was very excited to have the first batch made for us. So yeah, this cheese is about 10 days old when you'll be receiving it, which again, very exciting, really young, as this cheese should be enjoyed. So the name Hidcote is named after a local village of Hidcote, kind of best known for Hidcote Manor and its kind of fabulous gardens there. All of Dave's cheeses are named kind of after a local landmark or local village. So again, it's another subtle nod to that. Right, let's have a taste. So I'd expect this cheese to be quite kind of fluffy to start with. So you can see that geotrichum rind really nicely when I cut into it. And we look at the paste. It's got a really thin, delicate rind and then a nice fluffy center. And as I said, as this ages, it's going to get softer and gooier and almost kind of spoonable out of this box. Almost moussey. A really light, fluffy texture. Really fresh. It's really milky, kind of like notes of warm milk, sweet almond. It's really delicate, kind of floral, grassy notes. A really delicious and exciting cheese. So you'll only be able to get this from now until the end of the season in September. And as I said, you're the first people to try this season. So I hope you enjoy.